we want to talk about what happens when you guys, or we collectively, decide we want to sell a home or think about selling a home that we've been in for 30 to 50 years. So to start, I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. So Lynn Henderson, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Lynn Henderson. Paul and I, as you know, are the founders of Great Transition and host this seminar series. We have been realtors working together. I've been working with Paul for 17 years together as realtors. Paul has a couple more years on me. And we certainly enjoy working with seniors. This is really our passion and what we're very interested in doing. We see this as a way to help people, and certainly through this educational seminar series, we're hoping to give you information that you can use.
And I am Mark Wright. I'm one of the owners of Innovative Title Services. I have been in the title industry and mortgage industry now 35 years. So I have conducted about 20 to 25,000 closings. Kind of background really is I have a mortgage broker's license for 10 years, and I've been a licensed title agent for 25, I guess now. That's it about me.
And we work with Innovative Title very purposely. There's a lot of things that have to happen in order for somebody to get a house sold, under contract, closed, and sold. And we've worked with Mark over the years to fine-tune those processes and get them down to making your world as easy as possible when we go through that. So, Lynn, we hear this all the time. We go to somebody's home and they say, I'm going to sell my home and I'm selling it as is, period. As is, no questions.
Right.
So what's that? What's the reality of that?
So we do hear this quite a bit, especially when we're meeting with seniors. And it's important to kind of understand, I think, two sides of that. What that means to the seller and what that means in the real estate market and to buyers. So to a seller, what we hear when they say they want to sell as is that they don't want to spend any money to make any repairs. They want to sell the house as is. They don't want to do any work to it. They really want to do very little preparation in order to get that house ready to put on the market. And as realtors, we understand that. At that time in their life, usually seniors, as we mentioned, are either downsizing to something smaller, maybe going to a retirement community, and they really don't want to put the money out to do any kind of renovations or fixing up of properties. In the real estate market, though, as is can mean a little bit different. Buyers understand, they should understand, that when they're entering into a contract and it's an as-is contract, that the seller has no responsibility to make any repairs. Buyers always have an inspection period after they go under contract. That usually varies from 7 to 10 to maybe 15 days. It's dictated by the contract and what's agreed upon. In that time period, they do inspections and they can come back with a list of items that need to be repaired. In an as-is contract, the seller has no responsibility to make those repairs. But often, buyers ask for repairs anyway. Even though they know it's an as-is contract, they will still ask for some repairs to be made. And you know, in the greater world of buyers getting mortgages, there are some minimum standards that have to be met for homes. They can't have leaking roofs, for instance. The roof has to be in good repair. The appliances need to be in working order. So there are some basics that have to be present in the home for a buyer to get a mortgage. Okay.
And in an as-is contract, does it exclude things like a leaking roof?
No, it doesn't. As I mentioned, there are minimum standards that have to be met. So we often have sellers that will tell us about, you know, they have a leak over that back porch or something like that. And we always help them with getting estimates for that and getting that repair made. Doesn't mean we're telling you to put on a new roof, but you cannot have a leaking roof and sell the house.
So we run into all the time there's areas of town, Maitland, for example, we run into aluminum wiring up there all the time. That's okay, right? There's no big deal with aluminum wiring.
Oh, there's a big deal with aluminum wiring. So, you may have heard really in the last year, even more so, how homeowners insurance is becoming more of an issue. You see it in the Orlando Sentinel a lot. There was an article in the Sentinel just Sunday about the age of roofs and how that is affecting homeowners insurance. So homeowners insurance has become a more difficult issue with buyers purchasing homes. The insurers do not want to insure a home that has an older roof. Aluminum wiring is another big no-no. They do not want to insure a home with aluminum wiring. Now there are fixes to that. And there's also some electrical panels that they won't insure. So there are, as we mentioned, these minimum requirements that have to be met. All of those issues can hinder a buyer purchasing a home. So those have to be dealt with in some level.
So I read the article in the newspaper about the roofs.
Right.
And what did it say, 10 or 12 years old?
I think it varies on the
So
insurance
the question's
company.
about the age of the roof
And the
Yeah.
tile,
and
as
what
opposed
the-
to the shingles?
So
Well-
we're going to talk about that. And I'm repeating these so everybody can hear them. The question's about the age of the roof and does a tile or a different kind of roof that rather than shingles impact that?
And it does. I've got the article right here too, if anybody's interested in it. And it depends a lot on the insurance company. So there are insurance companies that will insure an older roof, but it depends on the age and it depends on the type of roof. Tile roofs are known to last longer, so they are giving them more time that they will insure them. Shingle roofs generally don't last as long, the lifespan is shorter, and so they are being much more strict with those roofs.
And if
So-
you have specific questions about your own situation, we can answer those
Yeah.
afterwards, but that's a really good question. And one other thing, Lynn, I don't think you touched on, what about plumbing?
Plumbing, the one type of plumbing that homeowners insurance companies do not like is polybutylene plumbing.
Now, they don't care about copper, if you have an
No, they
older
don't.
home with copper, as long as it's not leaking.
Yeah, that seems to be okay. It's the polybutylene plumbing that is an issue
And the fix for that is?
to replumb.
So you've touched on a number of things. You've touched on electrical, aluminum. It can be fixed without rewiring the home.
Yes.
The plumbing is kind of an issue. It has to be replumbed. And the roof, if it's older, if it's leaking, it needs to be fixed before the house goes on the market. So in the real world of real estate, how do we recommend people deal with those three issues? Do they go ahead and do it before they put it on the market? What do you do to handle that?
Well, what we do is work with the seller to see what are the issues and take a look at the house. And usually the sellers they generally know how old that roof is. We have an insurance company, an insurance broker that we work with, and we always have a consultation with him first, once we know some of these issues about the homes. And ask him about, okay, can we get insurance on this home? Can a new buyer get insurance on this home? Because that's what's important. Often sellers will say, well, I've got insurance, so why is that such an issue? But it is an issue for writing new policies. So you may have had insurance for years and never had an insurance company come back and want to do an inspection or anything along those lines. But for new purchasers coming into the market for your home, it makes a big difference. We have actually a sponsor that we work with, and Steve will give us quotes for insurance on homes, and we just tell them what the different parameters are that we're working with. If we see that it's a home that is not insurable in today's market, then we have a conversation about that and what are the remedies for it.
And insurance is a whole different deal, but I do want to make a point on insurance, off subject a bit. We run into this all the time. A family member is living here in Florida, there's not other family members around. they end up being gone and forget to pay their insurance. They end up in the hospital and forget to pay their insurance. They may have misplaced the bill, they may have dementia and not be really aware of what's going on. So insurance has lapsed. When insurance has lapsed, there's a big problem. And people will give up and they'll say it's too expensive, I can't get it. Well, we have the ability to get insurance while we're sitting in people's living room, and we do it all the time because having insurance on a home is such a critical issue. If you don't have insurance, something's bound to go wrong. So, but I think the point you're making is address the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Make sure it is addressed. You get estimates on those things so you know what the costs are going to be and deal with it from there. I want to move on. Lynn and I, because of what we do, we found we run into families and they'd have, I've got a lot in North Carolina. I don't know what to do with it, but we don't need it anymore. We had a family that moved to one of the retirement communities, and they spent their last summer in, before they moved into the retirement community, we were selling the house for them while they were living up in North Carolina in a vacation home, and then we sold the vacation home for them. So we handle sales of properties all over the country. We just did one in Phoenix, Arizona. And the logistics of that, for the purpose of this, are important, but we're familiar with how the closing process goes in different states. And it's very different state to state. So Mark, when does the title company get involved in the sale process of property here in Florida?
The question is kind of loaded because it depends on your situation. Traditionally, we see people come to us once they go under contract. Personally, to me, that's too late. You want to address what's going on with your title before you even list the home for sale. The reason we bring this up is due to the fact that we have a lot of people who have purchased their home, they've lived in it for 40 years, nothing's ever come up, it's clean, you don't even have to do a title search. I can't tell you how many times people have said it's clean, you don't have anything to worry about, yet it was a hand-me-down from grandpa and grandma to mom and dad and now their children, and they found out there was a judgment or an IRS tax lien, or somebody filed bankruptcy, or the legal description was wrong, or the instrument was prepared wrong that conveyed the property from grandpa and grandma to mom and dad because they prepared it on their own instead of hiring somebody to do it. So case in point, we see these issues come up all of the time where there might be something that you were not aware of. So to me, again, the time and point or place when to do this is when you're thinking of selling the property. Get a title search done, find out what's going on. It's very inexpensive, it's $85. To give some peace of mind that when we do go and get the right realtor, and mind you, getting the right realtor is half the battle. Anybody thinking of selling their house on their own is out of their mind. This is 2021, and there is a lot of stuff going on, and so many people think, oh, it's easy, I'll put a for sale sign out in front of my house, and we're ready to go. That is not the case anymore. You need a good realtor. Good realtor doesn't mean realtor who is licensed, because we have a lot of licensed agents out there that have no idea what they're doing, and you can get 3/4 of the way in and find out what you really are paying for, which is nothing. So you need somebody who really knows what to do with. So to answer that question, again, when you're going to sell the property and you're thinking about it, that's the time to approach us.
So Lynn, how do you handle meeting some of what Mark's talking about when you're listing a property?
Right.
What do you do to get on top of title issues?
So what we do when we're listing a property is as soon as we have a listing agreement signed, we're sending it to Mark. And Mark begins the title search immediately. So then we have some time that if something does show up, we have time to get it remedied. Because there's a remedy for whatever the issues are, correct?
Yes, and something I should mention, when we say a title search, just so you know what that is we're doing a background check on that property over the last 30 years. And the reason it's 30 years, that's the statute of limitations. So that's as far back as we have to look to see what is going on with the actual property itself. So when Lynn approaches us, we run a background check for that 30 years to find out what has been filed against it, who the owners were, and has everybody done their part to correct issues like paying off a mortgage? Is there a satisfaction? Have taxes been paid? Have owners conveyed in the proper manner? The legal description's right? Are the names right? Notarization? It goes on and on and on and on. That process sounds very tedious. It takes typically 5 to 10 business days for us to get that title search back, and then we present it to Lynn, and if there is an issue, we give her the remedy, what we can do to fix it.
And there's some things that come up, and just recently, we had an issue with a lot of people on the deed, and it's essentially an estate.
Correct.
So why don't you talk about that real quick?
So we have a situation right now where the father passed away and left it to 4 children. And only one lives here, the rest are all out of state. And what the children want to do is to have a power of attorney drawn up so that the local son will be able to handle the sale of that property. And that's a very specific power of attorney that's only for the sale of that property. This is not a broad-based one that you may be more familiar with. And so Mark, with the title company, he has an attorney on staff, and Joe will be able to handle that power of attorney just for that specific process.
And so, Mark, that's not necessarily a title issue, but why is it important that we get it down to one person dealing with it versus 4 in multiple states?
Well, it is kind of a title issue in some ways, because if you have 4 individuals, we're getting power of attorneys. We have to verify is the power of attorney valid. Will it work in the state of Florida? And it makes it easier for the transaction, quite frankly, because instead of sending the same documentation to 4 different individuals and getting it all back in a timely manner, and you'll learn in the process, real estate in 2021 is very different from when I got into the business. It used to be a 2 or 3 page contract, and now it's 16 or 12 pages, plus any addendums and riders and inspections and all of this. With that all being said, it can be very tedious. And going along those same lines, I've never seen a family where all 4 of them get along at the same time. So there's always one that is going to give you a hard time about the sales price and inspections and the fees and whatever is going on. So again, it simplifies it. And also, if you're doing any kind of estate planning, I do make it, just to make a point to it, be careful of who you're giving your assets to. Kind of what Lynn was talking about, we have a lot sale going on. This is a vacant piece of land in which grandma has decided to leave it to her grandchildren. And there are 28 grandchildren. So now we have to get 28 deeds, and no one lives in the state of Florida, and get this all done in a timely manner. And might I add, this lot sale is $30,000. So with all the effort and attorneys and everything that went into this, each one of them is getting less than $100 to sell this $30,000 piece of land that grandma thought she was doing a favor by giving it to all of her grandchildren. So you have to think about all of that.
And she'd been better off to sell it and then give the proceeds.
Something. Other than that, that's just a lot of work, a lot of added expense that nobody would have thought about up front. She thought she was doing a good thing, and turns out it was very costly.
And not to get off on another tangent here, but as an aside, I'll interject that when parents leave a property to multiple children, that is a good way to have your children not like each other for the rest of their life.
Agreed.
And we see that happen time and time again. So the role of the title company here is to make sure we have clear and marketable title. And that means,
Well, we're just what we were explaining. We run the title search. We look to see what, if any, defects are on the property. And then we alert the agents as well as you as the owners of what we have to do to take the steps to make sure that your real estate transaction is successful.
and how many of you have been in your home more than 30 years? When you closed, you probably got a book. Remember a book? You want
Abstract.
to talk about the abstract? You don't do those anymore.
No, abstracts of title have gone away quite some time ago, probably 25, 30 years ago. So now they do this title search, and it's all electronic. Used to be that back in the day, you went to the courthouse and you looked at the clerk books and you wrote down notes of everything that had been recorded over a 30-year period of time. Back then, we also made copies, and that you created what was called an abstract of title, which was you took it from the beginning of time and brought it forward through today. So there are some people that bring these abstracts from the 1800s. And basically, it's, again, the story of the life of this land. And some of them are very interesting, where there's chattel, meaning we'll give you 3 cows and this is what you got. Or you go to this tree, to that tree, to the rock, and that was your legal description. I mean, it's really come a long way. Now it's all done electronically, but this title search, again, is 30 years. It's run electronically, everything has now been put into a computer. Mistakes do happen, that technology is great, but it's also worked against us, especially in the fraud aspect, which tell me when you want to
We'll
talk
get
about
into
that
that.
part of it. But that's where we come into play to make sure there isn't any fraud or any issues.
If you do have an abstract and you've got nothing else to do, they're funny to stroll through. You'll get some of the neighborhood gossip. The lenders used to go visit the properties before they closed, and I was reading one, and went out to see Mrs. So-and-so. She's divorced. Went out to see Mr. So-and-so. He's a philanthropist and gave money to this, and so they interject these interesting things. So I met with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and they were such nice people, but their grandchild wasn't behaving. And you wouldn't think somebody interject that, but you know, it's all personal at the end of the day.
They're great for genealogy too, for what Paul said, because a lot of times they mentioned the chain of where the property came from and what the relationship was with the individual of the time. They are worth money, don't throw them away. We had one that came forth to us, wanted the abstract, and paid $10,000 for it. So some of them, depending on where it is and what the historical aspect is, are worth some money, so keep them.
And the interesting thing in Florida is we only go back to about 1850 was the land grants.
Yes.
So you can find out where the land grant went originally, and they say things like City of Orlando, you can't have barbed wire, you can't have an outhouse, no goats, no horses, no pigs. And so whether we know it or not, we've all been in an HOA for a long time.
Yes, we have.
So Mark, I know you have an attorney on staff, and he's one of the partners, but when do you get the attorney involved in this?
So the attorney only really gets involved if, one, you want legal representation. In other words, you want to make sure an attorney has laid eyes on it and made sure everything is what it is. That isn't very prevalent in Florida unless you think there's an issue. So typically, we only see the attorney get involved is if there is an issue, and for the reason mostly is economic. Who wants to pay an attorney $200, $300 an hour to review something that might not need reviewing other than peace of mind? So it depends on the individual, and it depends on what it is, whether it be maybe a probate issue that has come up, or we have siblings not getting along, depending what the situation is. Divorce is big. That's always a big problem where the attorney usually has to get involved, because although there's a court agreement, a couple of years have passed and now the house is being sold, and they don't want to honor the agreement from a couple of years ago. So again, it all depends on what the situation is.
So I wanted to touch on another thing, and you mentioned while we're talking about the attorney, if, for example, you own a property in North Carolina, that's what's called an attorney state. So attorneys are the only ones that handle closings up there. Florida is a title state. Did I say that properly?
Yes.
So title companies customarily handle closings here. An attorney can also do it. I would tell you, go to the people who do it every day for a living, not the person who's doing it as a courtesy, because they're your attorney and use them for other things. They're not specialists per se. There are real estate attorneys who are very specialized in it, but they tend to get involved in litigation and do commercial properties. And we're talking about residential here. Commercial is a whole other beast. So relative to working with seniors, and we're going to talk about estates, what kind of documentation are you needing when you're dealing with an estate?
Well, I do want to go back to the attorney thing real quick. As Paul mentioned, be very careful who you choose as your attorney with a real estate transaction. Because I worked for a title underwriter. An underwriter is who basically backs the insurance policy. So to give you a correlation, if you go to State Farm, you're not really going to State Farm. You're going to an agent who represents State Farm. So we're an agent who represents the underwriter who actually writes the title policy. They will tell you 99.9% of the title claims and issues in the state of Florida are attorney driven, because people have gone to their family attorney for their real estate needs. So again, to make a correlation, you don't go to your family doctor for a heart condition. It's the same type of thing. So make sure when you are reaching out for estate planning or anything of that nature, that you're going to a certified real estate attorney, somebody that really knows what they're talking about. But to go along with that, when there is an estate involved, are we talking like probate or prior to, either or?
It's your question.
All right. So when you have an estate involved, it's very important for us to be in communication with your attorney, because we have to see, is there a will, is there not a will, who's involved in the estate, and again, it depends on if this is prior to death or after death. After death, there's a probate action that has to take place. If it's prior to death, we have to see what the estate plan was. Is it in a trust? Is there what we call a ladybird deed? This is a life enhanced deed. Oftentimes we see family members who want to avoid probate, and they want the property to go to a certain individual. So we create a deed where it's yours as long as you're living, but upon your death, it automatically transfers to whoever you would like it to go to. And that is very popular right now because it avoids having the attorney involved and spending several $1,000s on estates. Our attorney, as Paul mentioned, is Joseph Lenti. He is a real estate attorney. And I will tell you, his average fee for a probate is between $5,000 and $10,000. Where a ladybird deed or a life enhanced deed, is the formal name, is $25. So you can kind of do the math on that. And again, you want to go to somebody who knows what they're doing and not just your family attorney.
And the life estate, life enhanced, ladybird deeds, we cover all that in another seminar, so I don't want to go off on that tangent. But there's reasons to do that, and there's absolute reasons not to do it. So that's the seminar we do with our elder law attorney. So Mark, you talked about open permits, lien issues, and there's fixes for those. You handle them. Just real briefly, how complicated is the lien search fix?
So what Paul's talking about is a municipal lien search. It's outside of a title search. Title search looks at anything of public record. Municipal lien search is anything that's not recorded of public record. So we're talking about things with municipalities, permitting, utilities, code enforcement are not recorded liens until it gets to a point where there might be a fine or an order through that municipality. So for instance, if you're with the city of Orlando and you haven't mowed your lawn in a month, and they come out and they have told you, mow it, mow it, mow it, and you've ignored it, they get something called an order filed against the property that says, look, we're going to take care of this. We're going to lien the property, and then you're going to have to pay a fine for that. That's where that becomes a public record. But before that, it's kind of a buyer beware thing. You don't know what's going on until you do this search. So to address what Paul is talking about, we do this search. We find out what's outstanding, and most times it tends to be permitted. This is for new roofs, air conditioners, electrical, plumbing matters, whatever it might be, where the contractor should have pulled a permit, had the work done, had it inspected, and closed it out. That is not considered a title defect. So in other words, you can sell your home with an opened or an expired permit. However, the likelihood of this happening is almost zero, because what buyer wants to inherit your problem? So what they do is they tend to do is they make you go in and close the permit, which is fairly easy if the work was done in the last 6 months. But we've had situations where a permit is 20 or 30 years old, and how are we going to close this out? And that's where the trouble comes into play. So typically what we do is we do the research to find out what the answer is, and then we give it to these fine people, and then they address it with you as the owner, or we talk to you ourselves.
And you work to get that stuff all done up front. This is not something that's happening the week of closing.
No. It's not happening the week of closing. It's
Depending on
usually,
where you're with, though. What
well,
title
that's
company
true,
it is.
and it depends on how long the municipality takes to return that lien search to the title company. Some of them take a little longer. But this is usually, once you go under contract, this is a couple of weeks after that, where Mark has the municipal lien search, reviews it to see if there are any issues, and if there are, and they can be handled easily and quickly. If it's something recent, that usually doesn't pose much of a problem. If it's a little older, then we get Mark involved to contact that municipality and try to get that lien removed from the property or closed out.
And we can close about 50% of them without anybody being involved, because of the legislation that's been passed. Some of it's
Yeah.
easier to do. Lynn does something special, which most people should do. When she goes to listing, she gets the municipal lien search done up front. So before we're even under contract, we know if there's an issue. And again, those that have owned their home 20, 30 years, municipal lien searches weren't done back then.
Right.
This is a new thing that has happened over the last 10 years. So you have to be careful that you think it's clean, but this might be from the owner before you and you never knew about it. We had one quickly, I want to tell them. I had one from the 60s. Somebody sold their house, they had owned it since the 60s. And it was a multi-million-dollar property. And there was 2 open permits with the city of Orlando. And the city said the records for the permits had been destroyed in a fire. So they knew they were open, but they didn't know what they were for. The seller couldn't close it out because they didn't know what it was, and they lost their buyer. Because the buyer was afraid that they were going to inherit somebody else's problem, and they wanted to walk away from the deal. So it can become a problem.
And we've had that happen before too.
Yeah.
We had one that was a 1968 deal.
Well, and the municipal lien search is the seller's responsibility. So it is listed on the contract as an item that the seller pays for at closing. The work is done obviously up front, but it is a closing cost to the seller. And then the buyer has the ability to review that, and if there's any issues, and usually those buyers don't want to inherit those issues.
And by the way, the cost of that is around $150 for a municipal lien search.
And speaking of cost,
Depends on where it is.
speaking of cost, I want to get moving forward here. It sounds like it's pretty darn expensive in terms of cost for somebody to sell their home relative to the title company. So why don't you talk about that?
So related to the seller, correct?
Related to the seller.
So if you're selling your property, the standard, we'll call it the standard costs that are applicable to the seller are the documentary stamps on the deed. That is a tax that goes to the state of Florida, and it's based on the sales price. And if you want to do the math, it's 0.007% times your sales price, and that is your tax. So relatively, that's typically, $1,000 or more depending on the sales price. Title insurance is regulated also by the state of Florida, and the owner's policy is traditionally a cost to the seller. And that, again, is based on sales price. It's $5.75 per thousand up to 100,000, and then it drops to $5 per thousand from that to $1 million. So 101,000 to $1 million. Along with it is the municipal lien search. That's part of the owner's policy because we have to show that you've done your due diligence to show there's no outstanding issues with the property. The title search goes with that. So remember, the municipal lien search is about $150, title search is $85, and then there is what we call a closing fee. That's our fee to do all of the work. And that, for our company, is $595. And that's pretty relative throughout the state, with the exception if you do an attorney, double it. It's typically at least double that amount. But those are the standard costs. And the only other one we haven't really talked about is if you are in a homeowners association or a condo, there is what we call an estoppel that we have to obtain. That estoppel fee is, again, the cost to the seller, and it's basically to get a letter from the association saying you're current. And that the state mandated cost is $250. But if you're delinquent, it's up to $500. And that's per association. So if you have a master and a community, it's $250 each side. So it can be very expensive, as Paul was mentioning.
So,
just to sell.
Lynn, this is really complicated. I mean, 0.007, 575, 5, 300, 200, 250. So what do you do to make sense of that for a person who's trying to sell their house
Right.
the first time in 30 years?
So what we do is Mark's company, Innovative Title, has an app that we can use. So often sellers will ask us, so if we're going to list at whatever the price is, how much will I net from that? So I can run a quick net sheet for sellers. We're making assumptions on what the sales price will be, but in that calculation is all of the numbers that Mark talked about. So I can very quickly and easily run that for sellers. So you have an idea of what you'll net from the sale of the property.
So I want to get into talking more specifically about the property, but let's, as part of that, let's talk about the seller, because the property doesn't sell itself. Somebody has to make a decision to do so. So when we get into working, particularly with people who've been in their home 30, 40 years, I guess without asking any other way, what are the types of sellers? What are the reasons they're selling in the big picture?
So it's all based on the motivation of the seller. There's a lot of people that we see that are planners and are looking ahead to what their needs will be in the future and are making the decision that they want to downsize in some form, at a particular time. So they're not being motivated by a health crisis. They're not in the situation that they absolutely have to sell to get out of that house. They've got a little more breathing room, if you will. They have time to plan it, and they have the ability to do what's necessary to get the house ready. We're not dealing with crisis situations. So we have sellers that want to sell like that, and then on the other side, we have sellers that absolutely need to sell and get out of the house now. And they are in a crisis situation. Maybe they've had some sort of fall, some health situation that they can no longer live in the house. Some of them have already moved. They maybe have already moved to assisted living or some other type of living situation, and the house needs to get sold. Very often, that house is a huge part of your assets, and the money from that house will help to fund the care that might be needed later on in life.
So somebody's thinking, I need to sell, want to sell, have to sell. Is it safe to say they're not getting a new job?
That's pretty true.
I mean, the sales of our properties up until the last one were all motivated by career family changes. You've got 3 children now, or 2 children now, and you've got a 2-bedroom house, not working too well, need a bigger house. Well, life's great, everything's going well, I want to move to a different part of town because I want a pool, I want something else, and so you're upsizing. Later on you might downsize to something smaller, but it's safe that our generation, our average customer's what, 75 to 85?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in the 70s, yeah.
Okay.
Early 80s.
It's a situation that's saying it's time to do something.
Right.
Right? So do they just go ahead and sell and then figure out where to move later?
Absolutely not. Especially in this market. Paul was mentioning before what a strong seller's market this is, which is wonderful for anyone who is considering selling their house. We don't really see any signs of that letting up anytime soon. But having said that, for buyers, it's difficult. So before and as we're working with seniors when they're planning moves, it's very important to know where you're going to go. What is your next step? And for some people, if they are looking to downsize to a smaller home, whether it's a condo, there's some patio homes, that type of living situation, it's tough because you need to know, we don't want anyone to be homeless. We need to know that you have a place to go to, okay? For people that are moving to some type of a retirement community, whether it's a buy-in community or a rental community, there's a lot of options there. Where you are able to actually make that move first to the community and then sell your home, okay? I think in the ideal world for seniors, that would be probably the easiest way for seniors to manage it. It would be to move first to the place where you're going and then sell the home, okay? A lot of seniors we see don't like the idea of their home being on the open market and having people coming through to view it and to see showings. They don't like that idea of having people coming through their house while they're living there. So, the solution for that is let's help you identify where the next place is that you're going to live and get you moved to that next place. Okay? Yep.
Talk some more about selling as is. Got an
Okay.
old roof. Something's wrong with your pool, the crap or whatever. Maybe you've got some plumbing issues. I want to sell it as is. I don't want to spend thousands of dollars when I'm going to put that money to something else.
Correct.
What do you do?
So the question involves the issue of selling as is, and it actually does apply here more. What should somebody do? And I think you go back to the plumbing, electrical.
Right, you still may want to sell as is, and we certainly understand that, but you can't sell a house with a leaking roof. Pool issues,
Old roof.
old roof is different. If it's leaking, that has to be addressed. If it's just an old roof, we can sell it. We may have an issue with homeowners insurance, and we try to be proactive in that sense, but it can be sold. Okay, we've done that in the last couple of months.
Pool.
Pool issues, just depends on what that issue is. We had a home we sold this year, had a pool leak. The pool level, the water level had dropped to about a third of what it should have been. The pool was green. The owners did not, they anticipated it was going to be thousands of dollars to fix this. We knew that had to be remedied. We could sell it, but the sellers were going to make much less money if we left the pool the way it was. So we have contacts all over. Had our pool guy come out, and he fixed it, got the pool back in working order. It was $800.
And they were thinking it was going to be.
They were thinking it'd be $5,000 to do this, and didn't want to spend that kind of money, understandably.
And I'm interrupting you, I apologize, but I want to touch on that, because what would the buyer have thought it cost to
The
fix that
buyer
pool?
would have thought, oh, I'll take $10,000 off that price, because then it becomes my problem. I don't know how much it's going to cost, so I'm going to make that seller pay for it one way or the other. So there are some issues that need to be addressed before you put the house on the market.
So you get quotes for all that, right?
Absolutely.
And then, because I want to expedite things here, you
Yeah.
put those out that we know that the roof, there's an issue with the roof and a roof cost.
Right. So if we know that a home has an older roof, and we have one right now, there's a few missing shingles, it's old, we know that it's at the end of its life, I went ahead and got a roof quote done. And we let the realtors know, we have a way to do that within our multiple listing system, that seller acknowledges the roof is older, here's an estimate of what it's going to cost.
So does that go in public records, what you just said?
It does not. It is information that the realtors have available to them. The general public cannot access that.
It's confidential to the realtor.
Yeah.
So I want to move, because we're
Yeah.
trying to move here. As is, not as is, how do you determine listing price on houses?
So, and that's a great question, and so much of determining a listing price depends on what market we're in. As I mentioned before, we're in a strong seller's market right now, and we are seeing that listing prices are getting maybe bumped up a little higher than you would normally think, because prices are accelerating so quickly right now. But in general, the way we set listing price is to zone in on that neighborhood. We're looking for relevant properties, and that's properties that are of similar square footage, similar amenities. If the subject property has a pool, we want to use other homes that have pools as comparison. And we're just trying to find the homes in close proximity that are as much like this home as possible. And then we delve into the numbers. We're looking at what that home is selling for, price per square foot. We're looking to see what amenities it has. Maybe it's got an updated kitchen that our subject property doesn't have. We can make adjustments for a lot of that. But we're doing a market analysis on that property in order to set the listing price. I will say that there's a lot of online types of valuations out there that are not necessarily accurate. People tell us all the time about, well, I looked on Zillow, and Zillow says this. And Zillow doesn't know what's inside your home. When we're doing valuations, I'm pulling up the properties and I'm looking at the pictures, because I want to see what kind of upgrades that home has. So we're really trying to be very specific and really narrow in on what properties are most like that one.
The online stuff, Zillow, any of them, not just, I'm not trying to just pick on Zillow, that's the one that seems most common, uses an algorithm. And part of an algorithm is what's on the market today. And if something's ridiculously priced, it's going to factor that in, thinking that that's a good number. and only a human being can determine if it's a good or not good number.
Right.
Do you hear from people when you're in their living room, oh, the house down the street sold
Oh,
for,
yes.
so my house must be worth?
Right. And certainly, most neighborhoods have a price range, and that certainly comes into play. But more important is to look at the specific property and what improvements have been made, you know, what updates have been done. That's the way to really look at it. And square footage plays a big role in that as well. So a home down the street that may be sold for more may have 300 more square feet. Well, that makes a difference in pricing.
And when do we know what the price is on a house
You know,
that's for sale?
our ability to look and see, obviously we can see what's on the market, we can see as realtors what properties are under contract, we can see when they're supposed to close. We do not have the ability to see what their contract price is. So until it closes, we don't know what it's going to sell for.
And we're not allowed by law to disclose the contract
No,
price.
generally sellers don't want that disclosed at all. And so, you know, realtors aren't going to tell you.
So you have a question, Jane?
Yeah, a lot of houses in the Winter Park area, or ranch houses that are built like in the 60s, say, this is gonna be a tear down, so I'm not gonna fix it. How do you know to fix it, to sell it, or not to fix it, because it's gonna be a tear down?
Well, we look at what's going on in the neighborhood.
So
Absolutely.
the question is that if you're in a neighborhood where they're knocking down homes and building, at what point does the house that you're living in become one of those it needs to be knocked down? And I'm gonna say the short answer is experience, and I'll let you.
Well, no, I just think you have to look at what's going on in the neighborhood and also look at that specific property. I know we have personal experience with this when we sold our home. They are building new, you know, big two-story
Palmer
homes
Avenue.
and down the street from where we live. And we did look at that, you know, is that going to determine, because we had a good-sized lot for the neighborhood. And in our particular situation, it really didn't affect us because they were doing that more with smaller lots and not larger lots. So we had a nice large lot, more square footage. It did not go for land value.
Just look at Palmer Avenue.
But it just depends on what's going on, the size of that property, how that can be used by a builder. So there's research involved in determining that. That's the short answer.
Lynn,
He's got a question.
yes,
This can wait till the end. Paul is going to ask Mark about some of the title stuff, so if you want to wait till the end.
we're gonna do
Yeah,
that
let's-
when
okay.
we're wrapping up. Lynn, somebody's gonna put their house on the market, I think we've kind of touched all this. Cosmetic updates, things the buyer, the lender, the buyer are gonna, the broken things, I'll call
Right,
them
we've
broken,
kind
the plumbing, the electrical.
Right.
They're all fixable. And then for insurance, so we've touched on all
We've
that.
touched on that.
So, should somebody, is it better, we're talking about folks that are gonna be moving to go somewhere. They're gonna go, and we're gonna just say a retirement community.
Right.
And they've got their place, they know when they're gonna move, they know when it's available. But, you know, I don't think I should move because my furniture's here and I can't sell the house empty.
So we sell homes all the time that are empty, that are vacant. And we do have sellers ask us, well, wouldn't it look better with furniture in it? And that depends. It depends on how much furniture is in the home and what it all looks like. If you are on television or even looking at homes and properties, you know, HGTV is a big influence on today's buyer. Whether we like it or not, it's a big influence. And HGTV shows model homes. You know, everything's updated, everything's fixed up, there's very little furniture. It's only kind of the basics of furniture, and all the accessories are new and sparkling clean, right? Buyers kind of expect that now. And they're looking at homes and thinking, well, you know, if it's packed full of furniture, well then how's my furniture gonna fit there? So very often, it's almost better to sell the house without furniture in it. Go ahead and get moved, get settled. There's ways we have to clear the house of extra furniture if that's something that's needed. And then we come in and can do what we call soft staging. You've probably heard of staging, and there are professional stagers out there, and there's a lot of different levels of staging. There are stagers who will come in and bring all new furniture in and make it look, like the model homes on HGTV. There's also stagers who will come in and do consultations, will work with you and your furniture and help you decide if maybe some things should be moved to storage for the time period you're going to sell your home, and how we arrange things to make it look best. And then for vacant homes, we have the ability to bring in greenery, towels, just some things to kind of soften it, put on countertops, things like that. The thing now is that buyers are all online looking at properties before they ever decide to come and visit your home. So the photography for your property when it's on the market is very, very important. And our goal is to make that property look its best for the photographs. And then if they like the photographs, then they'll come see your house, okay? So all of that whole idea of staging is really to try and show the property in its best light. We can do that a lot of different ways. It really depends on the particular situation, whether you're still living there or not, and a lot of those parameters.
So as we go through this process, let me real quick, anybody have a question on the property preparation? We've talked about issues as is generally means the cosmetic stuff's okay. If it's broken, HVAC's broken, plumbing, electrical, roof, it's got to be fixed. Those really aren't covered by the as-is contract, and even if they are, people are asking for them. So are any other questions on preparing? So yes, ma'am.
I know it's small, but it goes to the HGV. They don't seem to like speckled ceilings.
Oh, the popcorn ceiling?
Popcorn ceilings.
Yes, they do
So
not.
the question's about ceilings.
Yeah, well, do I go through that just so?
No.
Thank you. Okay.
No, do not. It's a mess.
I'm going to interject. We don't feel, I'm putting on my realtor hat here for a minute, taking off my moderator hat, that spending money on cosmetic stuff is going to bring money back to you. The big ticket items are kitchen bathrooms. Those are the ones that bring the most money back, but they're also where you're going to spend the most money. We just did a home, they had an original kitchen from '82. People were going in and saying, oh, this has got to go, it's got to go. We cleaned it. We got them $40,000 more than they thought they'd get for the house just by getting it clean. They moved to a retirement community. We fixed the swimming pool for $800. And I think in all total, they had stains on their ceilings from a roof that had been replaced and leaked. So we got to fix those because that just reeks of there must be something wrong. So again, we try to keep it as simple as possible. Let's get into negotiations.
Sure.
And Mark, we're going to bring you into this too. So because you get involved in them, you've got a contract in your hand and we're negotiating. So what are the points of negotiation in a real estate, Lynn?
So there's really 3 times when you as a seller will be expecting to do some negotiations. One is when you get an offer, okay, that buyer's presenting an offer to you. It's always in writing. And at that point, we help our sellers go through, because it's a long contract, and look at the important facts, whether it's purchase price, the closing date is part of the negotiations, the length of the inspection period. The buyer discloses what type of financing they're going to use for the purchase, if they are using financing or cash. So all those things come into play when you first get the offer, okay? So then you go under contract, you come to an agreement, everything gets signed and you're under contract. Now the buyer has an inspection period, and we said it ranges from 7 to 15 days. During that inspection period, they can come back to you and say, we've done our inspections and we want these 3 items fixed. That's another point of negotiation. In an as-is contract, the seller has no responsibility to make any repairs or to pay for anything. Oftentimes, the buyers will still ask for it. So there's your second point of negotiation. And then the third point of negotiation is when the buyer, if they're getting a mortgage, has an appraisal done. So if the buyer's using financing, their lender is going to order an appraisal. A certified appraiser comes out, visits the property, they do their research and come up with a value for the lender. And the lender determines then that they will make this loan to this buyer on this property. So usually the property has to appraise at contract price. If it doesn't happen often, but it does sometimes happen, that the appraisal may come in lower than the contract price. We're in another negotiation.
So you got 3 points of
3
negotiation.
points of negotiation. If you have a cash buyer, you take away that third point of negotiation.
Well, can a cash buyer ask for an appraisal?
They can, but that's generally cash buyers, what we're seeing is they're not asking for appraisals.
So Mark, I think we've touched on a lot of this, but Lynn gets a contract signed, they've negotiated, they've decided on price, inspections, all those things. At what point do you see the contract? Or what point should you see the contract?
Once it's fully executed, it comes to us. And much like what Lynn talked about before, we'll do usually a net sheet so people have an idea of what the net is. And depending if there's a mortgage on the property or what the association dues, sometimes we can do it sooner than later, but that is all dependent upon what we have at that time. But at contract, once it's fully executed is when we see it.
So somebody's done their due diligence, which is called inspection in residential. They've agreed, negotiated, agreed on everything. They got through appraisals. Appraisals are okay. What are there other conditions under which a buyer can walk away from a contract?
Yes, a buyer can walk away from a contract depending on a couple things. One, there's a financing contingency. If they don't meet the financing contingency, they could walk from that.
And what could cause that?
A lot of times it'd be loss of a job, divorce, death, job transfer. Could be many things. So
They went out and bought a new car.
bought a new car, correct. Bought something they shouldn't have, and it's thrown their ratios off. That'll throw it off. And the other thing is a title defect. If there's a title defect of some sort that is lengthy. Lengthy means greater than 30 days, by the way. If it takes longer than 30 days to cure, and they've sold their residence and they have nowhere to go and whatnot, they might opt to cancel the contract and move on.
Okay, and those are legitimate, they get their escrow back.
Yes,
So escrow, in this situation, if you live in California, escrow means something else in a lot of the western
Right,
states.
right.
Escrow is used to describe closing. In our world, when somebody puts down earnest money, they make an earnest money deposit of let's say $5,000, and they put it in the escrow account at Innovative Title Solutions. That's what I'm talking about, that money.
Right.
They lose their job, the financing falls through at the last minute, they legitimately can get their money back. Now, what do you do to stay on top of that stuff, Lynn?
Well, we're in constant contact with the lenders on this. The buyer discloses to us as realtors and to the seller who they're using for their mortgage. And so we have their contact information and we are checking in with them just to make sure everything's moving along the way it should.
So, Mark, what happens, we get past all of that, and the buyer just doesn't show up for close. What happens?
seller can sue for what they call specific performance. So you can make the buyer close if they're just walking away for absolutely no reason.
What normally happens in that situation?
Typically, the seller or the buyer doesn't want to go forth, and the seller goes, okay, I'll release your interest in the property as long as you give me the earnest money deposit.
Okay? So in that case, the buyer doesn't show up for closing. The seller is due the earnest money that's on deposit at the title company, in this case. Some real estate people deposit escrow money in their own real estate account or with a lawyer. We do not do that. That's a whole nother bailiwick. I don't think that's ever a good idea for a seller to be in that situation. What happens if the seller doesn't show up for the closing?
That can be a little more complicated. Again, the buyer now can sue for specific performance where, again, they can force the seller to sell. That's the biggie of what could happen to a seller if they don't choose to sell at the end. And It does happen from time to time, buyer or remorse, change of plans, death, there's many things, but that's the big, where a buyer could actually sue the seller.
And I want to ask you something that wasn't really on our list. On the way in this morning, I'm listening. Florida, in case we don't already know that, there's a lot of fraud in the state of Florida. There's a lot of fraud out there, period. But I heard a thing for title lock, title protection policy. What's that all about?
So
Yeah,
first-
have you guys heard about that? It's on the radio a lot now.
There's TV commercials for it too. It's basically, it's just an advertisement like you see for everything else. I mean, it's like the Ronco gadget of the day. It's basically saying that they, for a fee, and I don't know if it's monthly or annually, I've seen $14.95 a month, but basically it's for this company to monitor to make sure that no one is conveying your interest in the property to a third party, and then that third party sell it out from under you and you not know it, or put on, take a mortgage out or a lien of some sort. Can I just tell you, again, 35 years of experience, I've seen this one time, over 25,000 closings, once. And the only reason it happened, somebody died, the house was left vacant for 7 years, and the family didn't realize that there was a house here and somebody monitored it, forged a deed, recorded it, and tried to sell it. And by the way, we caught them. So this is really just kind of, I don't want to say scam, but it is. There's no reason for it. It's a waste of money.
It's kind of like the credit lock and the internet protection so nobody hacks your...
Right. And the thing about it that's funny to me is that they send you alert that the title has been hacked. So it's already happened. They're not preventing it. They're telling you it happened. So guess what? You're going to have to get an attorney just like you would have if you didn't have the insurance. So it does absolutely nothing to protect you other than to alert you,
and take money out of your pocket.
basically, right? For $14.95 a month, right?
So Lynn, what have we missed that you think's important?
I don't know. Let's see. I know Ruthie had a question.
I know that this is a complicated process. Is that safe to say? And it's important that you get someone that is, and I don't want this to sound like an advertisement, but that is experienced and does this for a living and has the people in place to support them, like the title company, like an attorney if things are going wrong, has the contractors and so on to help with repairs, because it is such a complicated process, and it's not stuff we as normal do. I don't mean me, we in the audience here do. We don't normally sell our house. You know, we don't normally go buy a car. We wait 5 or 10 years to buy cars. So we're waiting 25, 30 years to buy a house. Lynn and I got into this. It was a 4-page contract. The last 2 pages were in small type.
Yep.
And now the contracts typically, how long, outside of the contract, the 12 pages, how many addenda are you usually seeing?
We're seeing probably 6 to 10 pages of additional paperwork that are addenda.
So you're rifling through 20, 30
Yeah.
pages of paperwork
So we can
each time.
easily have a 20 to 22 page full contract.
And what happens when you get multiple offers? You
Well,
gotta read all of them.
We are reading all of them.
So we're reading through 10 sets of 32 pages
Yeah.
to make sure they're filled out correctly, to make sure no one's trying to sneak in a clause, because people will do that, especially in today's market. Mark, what did we miss?
I think if I had to give any friendly advice to all of you, it's much like what you talked about. It's something you don't do every day. Don't read or take, I should say, what you read on the internet as gospel. A lot of bad information out there, a lot. Don't go by the advice of your best friend or your maid or the gardener. Go with the true professionals, because we have so many people, because of the media today, believing what they read and see every day on TV and think it's real, and it's not. It just isn't. And things have changed drastically in the last 10 years, especially with financing in particular. Insurance has become
Insurance,
a
yeah.
huge thing right now, where a lot of people are being delayed in purchasing homes because they cannot get insurance at all. But on the seller side of it, especially if you're older and it's been 30 plus years, the experience is going to be totally different than what you experienced before. I assisted my mother and father in the purchase of a home in South Florida. This was 6, 7 years ago. And they could not believe how difficult it was. And it was a cash deal with a simple inspection, quick close, and it took 6 weeks and nothing complicated. It just was that intense of everything that you have to go through.
So I'm glad you asked that, because the question is about offers for purchase that are soliciting to come in. It could be an individual, it could be a realtor who says, I have a buyer. I will tell you, I will answer that one real quick. Every realtor in the world has a buyer. That doesn't mean it's for your house. So when they call and say, I have a buyer, they're not lying to you, but it may not be your house. I have buyers. I got a lot of buyers, so I can call you and say I got a buyer, right? The other thing is companies who are doing this, and we've got some very recent experience with that. So
Yep.
Lynn, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, there's, I think we call them iBuyers out there.
Yeah.
So there are companies, you may have heard of like OfferPad, some of those, who will come in and purchase your home. And the idea is that they're gonna make it so simple for you. You don't have to do showings. They'll come in, do a walkthrough, and then give you a price. And off you go, you've sold your house, that's it. What we're seeing in our experiences is that you're not getting top dollar for your property that way. It may or may not be as simple as them doing a walkthrough. They come back often and have a list of things that then they want to take off the price because of these repairs that need to be made to the house once they've taken a look at it. So it's not all it's cracked up to be, and you got to be very, very careful. In general, the way to get the most money out of your property is to put it out on the open market. And especially in these times when it's such a strong seller's market. That's where you're going to make the most money. When you have multiple people coming in to see it, taking a look at it, and then making offers. We are seeing multiple offers on probably, I don't know, maybe 75 to 80% of our properties now. We're seeing multiple offers. And that's pushing prices up.
And we could stay and talk about this for another 2 hours and put everybody to sleep, but there's lots and lots of questions, and these are things that in your living room, a good real estate professional will take the time and explain all of it, and how it works, and when it works, and why they do what they do, and when they can start marketing it to the public. But it is critical that it gets marketed to the public. Otherwise, you don't know what the market bears. And we are very frequently selling houses above asking price. So before you leave, did we try to sell you anything? I don't think so. I hope not. What are you going to do with what you learned today? I think there's some really valuable information, certainly things to ponder on. We're always available for consultations. Mark, we work with, I mean, literally every day. We seem to send him all the funky ones.
The fun ones for sure.
We've had some crazy things over the years, and I think it's important that because we've seen a lot of crazy, we don't get real panicked by it. We know what to do, and it's not that we necessarily know what to do. We know who to get involved, and I think that's almost more important than knowing what to do.
True.
So you guys have learned a lot today. I trust you've learned a lot today. You're a connection. You're not the I heard, they said. You came to the source and got, as we say, the truth about. And we trust you'll use that. And I challenge you to bring somebody next month. I challenge you to bring in Jessica, and as always I end with a quote. Downsizing makes a wallet feel fatter, material possessions fewer, relationships stronger, conversations easier, laughter louder, cleaning time shorter, and the fun times longer. So thank you guys for coming. God bless, and have a wonderful day.